Everybody, I'm assuming we're going to have some people flowing in over the next minute or two, but I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So welcome to our nVerge online session for 2016. Today we'll be looking at SAP ByDesign, specifically the approval processes, multiple step approvals, thresholds, configuration components, and some organizational structure components that are important to this process. So I'd like to begin with, my name is Ken Erb, and I am the practice manager for SAP ByDesign for FMT consultants. Today we'll be going through my introduction here. I'll introduce myself a little bit, tell you a little bit about myself, give you some background on how I know about approvals in ByDesign, and then I'll go through the purpose of today, the components that we're going to be addressing. And then I'm going to pop right into the demo and we'll be live in the system so I can go through all of these different components and show you exactly how the system performs. And then as we go through this session, any questions that you have, we have a moderator here that is going to be watching our chat window. So if you have questions throughout the session, we're not going to address them immediately, but we will have a questions and answers session at the end. So you can go ahead and drop them in there. We'll put them all together, and then once we get to that point, I'll start going through them as we get them in. Thank you. So the next component here, a little bit about myself. So I have a bachelor's degree in information technology. I've worked for multiple IT firms doing infrastructure, and then that's how I kind of segued my way into SAP ByDesign. I worked for a company that implemented ByDesign about 3 years ago. I did all of the data migration associated with that, a lot of the configuration components for SAP. We worked with a different partner from FMT then, and we went through kind of a rough implementation of SAP ByDesign. So there was a lot of issues at my previous company as it pertains to configuration and approval specifically. So since then I've moved on obviously and came to FMT, and I started here as a senior consultant. And since then I've been promoted into the practice manager position for SAP ByDesign. So that's a little bit about me and where I came from and my expertise with SAP ByDesign, how that started. And today we're going to be really talking about approvals and multi-step approvals, thresholds, the different functionality within. So to start talking about that, we have to put a little context around it. So as approvals go in SAP, typically in order to configure those approvals, you have to do that in the business configuration component of ByDesign, which is typically held by consultants or people who are high-end key users who have the ability to go into the configuration and understand where all of the components are that are associated with approvals, because they're not all in the same spot. And then not only that, but the questions are not the same for every type of approval, and there's a lot of different options for each one. So typically that portion of approvals, configuring them in your system to begin with, happens from the consultant side. But today what we're going to walk through is, if approvals are configured in your system, how do we manage those? And then not only that, what does it do, what are the capabilities, and how far can we use those to automate the process of your workflow as it pertains to the different documents in SAP ByDesign. So approvals in general, there's a lot of different types in the system. So you'll see here that there's departmental approvals, financial approvals, sales approvals, and purchase approvals. So you can see this list. I won't go through every single one of them, but they all are very, very specific to certain business areas and do different things for you as it pertains to workflow in your business. So for my previous company, we had a lot of approval workflows that were broken. And not only that, they were extremely hard to maintain. And once we jump into the system, I'll be able to show you some specifics, but just at a high level, you know, working in a company where you have to maintain approvals for employee turnover, or maybe there's cost centers or financial components in your system that change on a regular basis, and having to go in and change approvals with that, I think everybody knows that when you build a business process, the least amount of components that you build into it, the better, because it makes it a lot more simple for things to not get missed. And when you have to go in and update approvals on a regular basis, that becomes a very, very big problem and then things are being routed to the wrong people. Thresholds don't really mean anything, and the workflow isn't trusted. So we kind of experienced that from a very, very granular level in the approvals, and once we learned about what SAP's capabilities were, getting in there and reconfiguring them so that multi-step approvals are set up. You can have multiple options within one step. Making sure that there's direct approvers set up so that you're driving your approvals, your managers for those approvals based on your org structure, your organizational structure, instead of putting in hard coding in someone's name. So there's a number of different components here that we see with clients that are often overlooked, or maybe the functionality just isn't known, where we go in there and we can streamline these processes so that you almost never have to touch your approval processes, so that it's all driving off of automatic components in the system. So I'm going to jump right into the system now. And you're going to see here I have our demo system open. So this is just the typical SAP ByDesign, and you're going to see I have all the work centers on top because I'm administrator. And one of the work centers you're going to see here is application and user management. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is where we go to configure processes, and then how do we put them in place. So if you look in application and user management, and then you go down to task distribution, you're going to see an option for approval processes. Once you get in there, there's a filter on the left side here that allows you to look at active processes, inactive processes, expired processes, and then you're going to see that this says with open tasks. So I'll show you exactly what that means also. Or you can look at all processes. So currently the filter is showing active and scheduled processes. If I hit go here, you're going to see that it's going to show me the bold titles here are showing the approvals that are configured in the system, and what active actual process is in there currently today, and its validity. So you'll see, for example, approval process for expense reports. This is the active approval process. It's valid from 8/30 to 12/30/31/9999. So this is unlimited validity. So then you'll see that there's a bunch of other ones in here for goods receipts, purchase orders, purchase order item approval. This is an example of a configuration component where you can put in a purchase order approval and then also allow for purchase order item approval also, and it actually breaks it into two different processes. Purchasing contracts, shopping carts. So there's a lot of different approvals that you can use in the system. They're not all configured here, but for our purposes today, I'm really just going to focus on a purchase order approval and speak a little bit towards what it means to have different options within these processes. So the first thing that I was mentioning here is this open approval tasks. So what happens is if you put in a new approval process, it's going to replace the old one. So you don't go in and edit it. You have to create a new one by copying it, and that's what this button right here is for, copying it. And it's going to create a new process, and it's going to sit in preparation. It's not valid yet, and we'd have to change these filters to see it after I create it. But the reason for that is because of this validity, right? So if I make this valid up until today, and then starting tomorrow I have a new process that starts, it's going to change the route in which those approvals are going to go. For example, if I'm changing a manager or if I'm changing a threshold, a purchase order that's created tomorrow is not going to follow the same path that it did today. So since that's the case, once I make that validity switch over from today to tomorrow, the problem is there's going to be open tasks in the system. So there's going to be approvals that are sitting in someone's queue tomorrow morning that were put through today's process. So since that's the case, the system gives you the ability to view and show open approval tasks. And what this does is it gives you an option, or at least the visibility into approvals that were processed under the old process, and you can go back and take a look at those. You can either reject them or you can reroute them using Business Task Management, which I'll show you that in a little bit. For this instance, what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and we'll create a new process for purchase order, so I'm going to copy this one. So it's going to open up our approval process. So this is the new version of it. You're going to see the system automatically generates a number here. So typically what I do is there's a default approval process when you go live in your system. I generally like to change this to approval process for purchase order, and I'll change this to version 1.1. And then this gives me the ability so that when I come in next time, I can keep this very clean and concise and change it to 1.2 or 1.3, but for today, we'll just make it 1.1. So when you get into your approval process here, you're going to see that there's no validity, and that's correct because this is a draft of an approval process that I haven't scheduled to be valid yet. And you'll see the approval process is down here. So there's a few different components that you're going to see. The first thing you're going to see is our process steps. The default process step is one step, and it doesn't really have much to it. As I get down and show you these examples, you'll see what I mean. So the first thing I'm going to do here is add a step. So what this does is this gives me the ability to add multi-step approvals going to multiple people or built on certain conditions. So this first approval here is going to go to a specific person or persons, multiple people, and then once that approval is completed based on all of the conditions and parameters that this step has, it will then move on to step 2. And I can name these however I choose, so we can call this step 2. I can even change the name of this one to step 1. And typically what we would do is we would say, you know, if this step was something very specific, or if I were building this around a certain framework of approvals, I would name these pretty specifically. So this might be threshold of $1,000. And then this one might be threshold $100,000. So it does benefit you to name these, so that way when you're coming into the approvals and you want to change these, what you're doing is you're making a copy of the old one, and then I would come in here and say, okay, well I want to change this to be no longer $1,000 but $2,000, so I would know where my $1,000 approval is without having to go into the mess down here and look at the conditions and look at the different work distribution. I wouldn't have to do that, so it benefits you to put a little detail in here. What I can also do is I can make two steps together. So if I want to have two different conditions that I want to control separately, I can make these both part of the same step. And what that means is the conditions and managers in this step also have to approve at this, and then these ones also have to approve. So it's both of them have to happen in order for it to move to the next step. So you can see I can add as many as I want here and make this step 2, and then I can also add step 3, 4 as far as you want to go. So that's kind of how the stepping works and making it multiple conditions. We'll take a look at exactly what the conditions are that we can build in, what are the thresholds we can build. So under step 1, if I take a look down here, you're going to see that I can just change the step here. I can change the name here. It's the same exact thing as changing it up in the process step name here. The other component here is this work distribution. So I'm going to drop this down, and you're going to see that there's a number of different options here. So these change based on the type of approval that you're using. There are a lot of common ones. So for example, something like approval by cost center is very common, and then also direct approvers is very common. So I think a direct approver is actually in every single approval in the system because this is the option that allows you to hard code someone's name in. You don't always want to do that because if there's employee turnover or there's someone moves up in the company and they're no longer in this approval threshold, you'd have to come into this approval process, recreate it, create new validity, and it just becomes a headache, something that you can't track very well, and it's just a pain. So in a lot of cases what you want to do is you want to do this by some sort of a manager. In this case, what I can say here is all line managers or approval by cost center. So if I choose cost assignment, you'll see that it's going to give me a little description down here right below it, and it's going to tell you exactly kind of what this means. But at a high level, cost center assignment means if a purchase order comes through and it has a cost assignment of any of these given areas, for example, project management, directly to a cost center, or whatever it may be, it's going to go to the direct line manager of that. So if it's a project, it's going to go to the project manager, but if it's a cost center that you're applying it to, it's going to go to the closest direct line manager to that cost center. And if that doesn't make sense to you right now, it will once I get to the org structure. And I'm going to show you exactly how managers are set up in the organization and how those approval flows will go through that structure based on these rules. So if I choose here direct approver, it gives me another option over here to edit it. So if I edit it, it's going to pop open a little screen here for me, and it's going to show all of the employees in the system. So if I select Catherine here, I can choose multiple people if I want by holding Control, or I can select a bunch of people by holding Shift, and once I have them selected, I can hit the single arrow and it'll bring those 3 or 4 into my approvals. I can do the same thing back. If I want to bring everybody over, I can hit the double arrow, but considering there's 27 employees in here, I probably don't want everybody in the company approving. So in this instance, we'll just grab Bob and push him over. So that's how you would hard code someone into the approval. Now you're going to see additional options down here, and these are going to change based on your option up here. So if I change this to cost center assignment, you're going to see that I get more options down here. If you hover over anything that's underlined in the system, it's going to give you a tooltip, and it's going to tell you exactly what this is. So for example, all approvals required, that's exactly what that means. It means that if you put in multiple people in here as approvers, it's going to require all of them to approve before it moves to the next step. So a lot of companies don't like that. They want to have multiple people in here, and if any of them approve it, it can go. So in that case, you would leave this unchecked. Automatic approvals are set up because there is a situation where the system cannot determine an approver. So for example, you've terminated a manager in the system, and it cannot determine a manager above him. So what it will typically do is roll from one manager to another, but if that is not the case, or if you are selecting a cost center and there's no one there, the system would otherwise not do anything. So the approval would just sit there, no one would know it's there. So this option would give you the ability that if it cannot determine who the person responsible is for the approval, it'll automatically approve it. Not always the best thing, but it's a good option to have if you're not extremely concerned of a specific type of approval. And you have to remember, this is going to be very specific to this step of this line item. So every time I click on a new step here, it's going to change that rule. So this will be very specific to this process. And then skip reapproval. So if this is another option that kind of came in after the fact that just allows you that if a manager says, pushes it back to the employee and the employee resubmits it, that this will skip reapproval. Now you come down to the conditions. This is really where you build out the condition of your process step. So again, this is completely dependent on what step you have selected here. This information and conditions will change based on your step. But if I'm looking at step 1, if I scroll down, I can see that there is a total net value here of greater than $20,000. So this is a pretty straightforward threshold for a dollar value of $20,000. If a PO comes through and it's $19,999, it will not go through this approval step. If it is higher, it will capture this and it will go to the person I've selected in work distribution. So what I can do here is a couple of different things. There's a number of different conditions and thresholds that we can use, but if I go to this specific group condition, I can edit it, and I can add a condition to it. So I can either edit the $20,000 by clicking Edit here. I can remove the condition completely, or I can go into Add Condition to this group. So this is kind of the same thing where I can use a AND statement where I can choose 2 conditions where if they're both true, then it applies. So it's just kind of an if-then, an and/or situation where I can kind of create these conditions to be very, very specific to a, whether it's a cost center, whether it's to a buying company, to a project task, even a product category ID. So if a purchase order comes through with a specific product category ID, that maybe it's a high valued item, and no matter what the dollar threshold is on it, if it's in this product category, maybe I just want to look at that. So that's where I could choose product category, and I could choose the conditions here. So this can be kind of confusing at first, but it's pretty straightforward. So what you're doing here is you're saying product category, and it's allowing me to choose what I want it to contain or not contain. So your product category, you can either type it in directly here, or you can type in something short. For example, if your product category is raw materials, I can just type in raw, and then it'll capture anything that is raw materials, raw cable, raw whatever. So I can just have it contain whatever item I want in here, or I can be very specific. So that's the way I can add to this group condition and make it so that maybe it's 2 conditions that I want both of them to apply. in order to use this process, use this workflow. I can also add an additional group. So this would be an OR statement. Now if I look at this, it gives me the same options. There's a number of them in here. Most of these are very self-explanatory. If I want to look at a specific supplier, or if I want to look at a specific requester, the person who created the purchase order, or if I want to look at a total dollar value, or a percent, so a percent change would apply to the change in an order. So I can choose a number of different things here. A purchasing unit, and it gives me the same operators here. In this case, it tells me equal to, matches a pattern. There's a number of different things that you can use. And then with this one specifically, what I would do here is say, let's edit this, and I want to change this down to $1,000. It does make you choose the currency. And this is where you would see where it was used total net value. And I could change that threshold. So there's the ability to create multiple steps, and then within those steps choose conditions and or conditions that I could add using one group or multiple groups, and I can assign them to different people in the system using this work distribution area. So it is very powerful, as you can see, that there's a number of different ways that I can create conditions in here that would look at something very, very specific in the system to create an approval process that's very specific to that, that area. So one thing to remember is that if I create this approval process and I don't drop in any conditions at all, this is going to be a blanket approval. It's going to cover every single purchase order that's created in the system because there are no conditions. So if there are no conditions, it's going to say everything will go. And so this is where I would refine if I want only certain types of purchase orders to come through. So once I'm done with this, I would save and close it. In this instance, I'm just going to remove this so that I can get this to save and close. Okay, so now what I'm going to see here is that this other approval process is going to show only under all processes, and you'll see that there's different categories here, different statuses, ended with tasks, so this would give me the opportunity to go in and look at the show open tasks area, which I'll show you briefly. So this shows me the expense report, 49, who it was, and I can even click on who's responsible for it. It doesn't give me functionality to jump directly into it from here, but it is a nice functionality for me to be able to view this and know where to go after. And then if I scroll down to my purchase orders, you're going to see my active one, and then you'll see my draft. So now the key component here is I need to schedule this. So in order to do that, I would edit validity. So I would choose my draft, click edit validity. Now this screen can be kind of confusing, so I'll explain it step by step here. So this check button allows you to check at any point in time whether or not the changes that you've made in this validity are accurate and will work. So what I like to do is just go ahead and fill it out, and then I check it before I even try to save and close to know if this, the validities that I've changed in here are accurate. So what you're seeing here is my new approval, which is version 1.1, and my old one here. If I scroll over, you're going to see now my validity dates. There's this checkbox over here for unlimited validity. It's important. This is the first step you take. So I would click on this, and it's going to change my new approval to be unlimited, and my old one will no longer be unlimited. And then what I need to do is I need to select a time here for the cutover to happen. So this time for my validity date from and my validity date to are going to be the same because I want my old one to end at the same time as my new one starts. So in this case, what I would do is just say, okay, well, let's do the beginning of the day tomorrow. And I would just go ahead and check this. So you're going to see all processes are consistent. If I change this, I'm going to get an error message, and it's going to tell me that my validity dates overlap. So it is important for these dates to be identical. Or if you don't, and you create this one out farther in the day tomorrow, you'll have a gap. So you don't want that to happen. Then the approval process would not hold. So in this case, I'll go ahead and save it. And then the next thing you're going to see here is if I refresh this screen, I can change this filter back to active and scheduled processes and hit go. And then what we're going to see here is my new purchase order. I can see my active and I can see my scheduled, and you can see that when it's scheduled for. So this is going to go live tomorrow at the beginning of the day, UTC time, or Eastern time rather. Okay, so the next component here, that's how you kind of build your processes around your active approvals in the system. Again, I want to reiterate that there are different options within each one of these approvals, but we wouldn't be able to go through them all because there's so many. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the next step here, and I'm going to show you guys what the org structure looks like and how it pertains to these approvals. So a little background on the org structure. This is where you would build out your company as it pertains to the structure, including your legal entities to your physical locations, down to your managers, down to your employees. And if we take a look at the org structure in a hierarchical version, you're going to see here that there's always a holding company at the top, and then you have your companies beneath it. So in this org structure, we're going to see where managers reside and how the flow works of approvals. So if I pop down into Almica and I go into headquarters for Cleveland, I'm going to see that I have some org units here for finance and for HR. So these are all coded with an org unit ID. So like you saw in the approvals, the conditions that we can create, we can choose cost centers. So if I take a look over to the right here, you're going to see what kind of org unit these are. And these checkboxes will tell you exactly whether or not it's a cost center, whether it's a profit center. Almost everything ends up being a reporting line unit depending on how you want to see these in reporting. And then you're going to see your business residences and companies. So this is a good view for you to see the cost center roll up to a profit center, and then profit center roll up to a company. And then so you're seeing that right here with your headquarters in Cleveland, your company Almica, and then rolling up to your holding company. So in this instance, you're looking at org unit A1120. In this, if I created a purchase order and I allocated my cost assignment to this organizational unit for human resources, the approval based on a direct line manager would go to Edward Black. And then if Edward weren't here, it would roll up to Catherine because she is the next in the hierarchy of managers. So where you would see a problem is, and I had mentioned this before, is there's an option for automatic approvals. If Catherine were not here, or in either of these positions here, and Edward were here, and I put a purchase order line assignment to A1120, and Edward no longer existed, or maybe his employee has been terminated in the system wouldn't know who was next in line because Catherine isn't here. So if that were the case, the system would basically go nuts, and what it did in the past was did a global assignment to everybody it sent out notifications to everybody in the system. So it doesn't do that anymore, but what it does do is it would sit in a business transaction and it wouldn't have an approver. And it would sit in what's called not assigned items, which I'll show you in just a second. And that's where, as an administrator, you would want to kind of watch that queue to make sure that there isn't anything that's not assigned, and if it is unassigned, to assign it. And I'll show you what that looks like. So in the org structure, you can see that I can break down into all these different areas, and you'll see all of the managers that are assigned here. So it is important as an administrator that you're assigning managers to all of these units as they need to be assigned, and the way you would do that is select on your org structure, and down below, much like many other screens in ByDesign, is this information is dependent on which org structure I select. And if you look at the General tab and I scroll down, you're going to see that there is an org unit manager, and that's who is going to be what you would call your reporting line manager for this org unit. Now, if I back up, that explains kind of the org structure and how those flow in the system. And then if I go back over to application and user management, you're going to see business task management. which is in the same area, task distribution area of your approval processes. The first thing that's going to show up here is this unassigned item. So this area is a housing area for any notifications, tasks, alerts, approvals, anything in the system that is considered workflow that flows through the system from one user to another or from the system to a user will come through here. And if it's not assigned or it cannot determine the user, the system gives you the ability to rerun determination. And the reason that that button is there is because if you had validity for an approval that was in the past that didn't cover this approval that came through and did not get assigned, you can change that approval and rerun determination right now so that it does capture that approval and go through the routing. So in a lot of cases it makes sense for you to come in here and select all these items, rerun determination, it'll determine if it can find the person, it'll send it, it'll clear from this menu. You can also look at all items, and just to give you an idea of how you would go about changing an approval that is an open task, like we'd mentioned, you know, an approval that is sitting in someone's queue tomorrow that was created under today's rules. This is where you would see it. So we could come in here and we could search by using the Advanced tab here by looking at just approvals, or if I just wanted to say, I can look by a keyword, and you can see here that the system is going to show me the different types of approvals in the system, and if there were purchase order approvals or sales quote approvals, I can see those here. There's a number of different things that we can use to filter this list down and be very specific to what we're looking for. For example, the status is here. You'll see this shows a completed notification or a completed task that went to someone. I don't want to see anything that's completed. I want to see only maybe new ones. So I would go in here and I can change my filtering based on that. But this is a very powerful area. So as an administrator, this area would give you the ability to go in and see approvals, see any number of those things, and reassign them. So in this case, let's take a look at like this sales quote approval. I can assign this item to someone new in the system. So if there's a stuck approval or it wasn't assigned or whatever it may be, I have the ability to come in here and reassign it to, say, myself. And then you'll see that then there was a new assignment. Now if I logged into Ken Erb as a user, I could go into Manage My Area, into Approvals, and I would see that approval. Now the other areas in application and user management are task substitution, employee work distribution. So this task substitution is very powerful too. So if you have someone that goes on vacation, this is exactly where you would go in to create that substitution. So when you create a new one in here, you can reuse it. So I can come in and edit this old one. And it's not active right now. So if I wanted to activate it, I would have to check the box for activation. I would create a relationship type. So fills in for is substituted by, so you can do it either way, the person who's leaving or the person who's subbing. And then you would choose your employee. So what this is going to do is any workflow, any approvals in the system that are flowing through the system are going to automatically flow to this person within the time that they are set up in here, and this is active. So this is really important that this is maintained appropriately, because you can see that there's no validity dates here. It's either active or inactive. And I can create a new one. And then we have employee work distribution. So these employee work distributions can drive a number of different things. So you can see in here that there's a lot of different options, so I can't go into every single one of these. But to give you a high-level idea of what these do, I can take a look at approver for payables. Let's take a look at the purchase order one. Alternate approver for purchase orders. So when I come into the alternate approver for purchase orders, I can come in here and I can add a rule. I can change the name of this rule, and I can add in the employee that I want to be the alternate approver, and I can add in validity to this area. So the substitution area is limited with not being able to use validity, but if you come in and use the distribution rules, you can indeed use validity on these, so that I can set this up, save it, leave it in the system, and it will only be valid for a certain period of time. And you can see that there's a number of these. So purchase or approval value limit, there's a number of different things that I can use in here. And these are more specific to, creating an one-time distribution rule or something that I want to use forever. I can do it either way here, and it gives me the ability to do it with validity. So now if I go into manage my area, so this is a work center that every manager has in the system. So if you have anybody that would have employees underneath them, or they're expecting to have some sort of workflow going to them from an approval standpoint, this is the work center that you would assign to them. And then from an administrative standpoint, you'll see that there's a number of different things that you can do within this work center, so you can give them access to certain things within the actual user security that you choose when you give this to someone. So it's important that you make that accurate, because under approvals for a given person, they're going to see all of the approvals in the system as it pertains to purchase orders, time recordings, expense reports. Everything will flow into this one area, and you do want to make sure that this is configured properly for them to see those approvals. In this case, we don't see any. If I logged into my other user, we would see the one that was pushed in from the task substitution that I did. So we'll do that real quick. So this user is set up as a manager in the system. It's actually set up as an administrator, so you're going to see all the work centers also. You go into manage my area. Go into approvals. And you'll see the one that I reassigned, the sales quote that I reassigned to the user K-Herb. Okay, so to bring this thing full circle, I want to jump back into a approval process for you, and I want to explain why it's important to understand these rules. So for example, in my previous life, we had an approval process set up where we had multi-step approval, and you can set these up however you want. But the problem with these approvals were that every single condition was set up in its own process. So what that meant was if I had approval threshold of $1,000, approval threshold $5,000. So what this does is it spreads your process out quite a bit. And the reason that that's a problem is because whenever you come in here to make a change, you're making a change in multiple places, especially if you have multiple processes that sit congruent to each other. It ends up making it a pain to change these on a massive level. Another thing that we've run into also is making direct managers in here. So if I choose like a direct approver, and I drop in Catherine, this will go unassigned. And then not only that, but if I have the same approver, the same person that shows up multiple instances here, I've had cases where I had to go in and change out that person on every single one of these line items because they applied to all of the approval rules that we had, but you don't have to do it that way. The way you would structure this is to make it the least amount of work possible, making it direct line approvers, using these functions. SAP's lifecycle has added a lot of these different options over the different upgrades we've had. So there's a lot more options than there were 4 years ago for approvals that we're seeing here. So it makes it very granular in ability to go in and choose things like approval for next level line manager. But these things weren't there before, and it makes it very easy to be very granular with these. Okay, so that covers the approval processes, and if we take a look real quickly, I was going to show you, if I look at the expense report and I copy this, you'll see that the expense report actually has a number of different options in here. So these ones are approver of employees cost center, highest cost center, all cost centers. So as it pertains to the document within ByDesign, so you have an expense report that you're putting in multiple line items for or cost centers for, the options will change in here to drive those approvals to specific people based on the document that you're actually creating it for. So if I go into every single one of these, you're going to see that my options for work distribution and also my options for conditions will change, and there's a lot of them. So it's important for you to get in here, play around with it a little bit, and actually understand what we're seeing as it pertains to the different options that you have and how granular you can get. Okay, so at this point we'll move into the questions. And did we have a couple come through? Okay, Catherine, is there a way to create an approval setup where approvals for sales orders, for instance, will go to the assigned line manager in org chart unless the person submitted is a departmental manager? What's happening now is that sometimes a manager will submit an order and then it ends up going to the CEO for approval when they should be able to approve it themselves. So in this instance, let me read through this again. So what we would have to look at here, so the term departmental manager would be something that was probably company specific. So in this instance, we would have to say, okay, well, if we want to create an exception for the type of person that it is, there is a couple of options in there, like the one we just looked at. Next level line manager would be something that would allow you to skip the first approver and look to the next person. What that would do for you is if your org structure is set up the way that I would think it is set up is you would have your a certain level of org structure and then your departmental manager would typically probably always be 1 or 2 levels above that. So there's potential there to use that, but this specific instance, if you wanted to identify someone as a departmental manager, we would probably have to do something with extension fields or some way to determine if that person resides as a departmental manager. I don't know if they would reside at multiple levels in an org structure. I don't know if they're all at the same level, but I think we would probably have to identify those using some sort of a outside indicator to drive that. Okay. So I'm going to jump back into the system really quickly. I'm going to go into some business configuration components. So this is an area where we would go in and we would actually configure some of these approval processes, and I want to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So if I jump into my first implementation area and I open up my activity list, there's a number of different areas where these actually reside, but if I come in here, I can see different approval configurations that will happen for things specific to whether it's purchase order related or goods receipt related. There are some specific configurations that you can do in fine-tuning as it pertains to this. So what you saw here is I just went into business configuration. In this instance, our demo system has an open project. In this case, it's an implementation project, but you might also have change projects in here that you can use. And then what you can do is open up the activity list directly, and then another area where we can do this is edit the project scope. So there's 2 components really, right? So the project scope is what's going to determine whether or not an approval is available in your system. So you would go into the specific scoping area, choose that scoping selection, and then there's questions associated with those that can drive whether or not an actual function is available in the system. And then there's the activities area where you've scoped in the item, but there's other items that you can configure in the system as it pertains to different scenarios in the system. So if I type in approve, this is in our open activities activities area. So you're going to see things like this. So shopping cart approvals, you'll see purchase order approvals in here. You'll see your line item purchase order approvals. So the purchase order, you can see that there's 3 different items here. So the reason this actually happened was because SAP released additional functionality over the course of time that allowed you to do approvals for purchase orders at a header level, re-approval for headers, and then also at the line item level to be able to distinguish where certain approvals went. So if we take a look at one of these, I can define approval process for this purchase order. And this is where it will bring me directly into my active scheduling. So this is a way through the business configuration to do this. This is where they would do it as it were for your implementation. And then more importantly, what's even kind of cooler to know is how to do it in scoping. So if I edit scope, the way you would do this in the future obviously is you would open up a change project and then you would start adding items to your change project, and then you would have to merge it with your production system. So the way that this works is you create a change project in a test system, and then you can migrate it into your production system. You can also do this stuff directly in your production system as a change project, but it's not really recommended. You want to test this stuff out before you make the changes. In some scenarios, it's okay. With approval processes, it's okay, probably because you'll put in the approval process. You just want to make sure that if there is a default approval process that you're aware of that before you activate it. So if I hit next here, I'm just going to next through to the scoping section. And then once I get into the scoping section, you're going to see all of the business areas that you have that are open in your system, that are configured, scoped into your actual system. We can look at things like purchasing, self-service procurement. So, for example, if I take a look at this from a scoping perspective, there's an option in here called self-service procurement. Now, if I have this scoped in, this is going to give me the ability to create purchase requests in the system without linking to any sort of document. You can link to them after the fact, but it allows you to create that. So in order for us to get the approvals to work for that, we would have to make sure that your approvals are configured. And we would see that under, let's see if we can find an approval in here for sales. We can do pretty quickly, I think. Selling products, sales orders. So once this is actually scoped in, there's 2 steps here. So I would say, okay, well, if I want sales order and I want sales order approvals, if I hit next here, it's going to go into my questions. And this is where you're going to see the granularity of each area. And these checkboxes are what turn on functionality in your system or not. Again, it's a very powerful area, so if you're doing this, it's something that you want to do in test first. Make sure that everything is working as you design, and then moving it to production. So in this instance, if I take a look at sales orders, you're going to see that there's a number of questions over here. They pertain to a lot of different things in the system. But you'll see down here, so this is an example of something that is not configured in the system, but we can going forward. So this would be the ability to go in and use multi-step approvals for sales orders for multiple sales orders. And then there's probably a configuration question in here. I don't see the actual approval process in here, but this is where you would actually go in and do that. So you're scoping, and then you would get to your questions, and this is where you would mark the actual questions that would pertain to approvals in the system for anything like purchase orders, goods receipts, and then a lot of the accounting functions have approval processes associated with clearings and under and overpayment. All of those are very specific to a company. Some companies aren't going to care because they only have one controller in there that's managing it all, and other companies will have multiple accounting staff, and they want to be able to see these transactions happen. Okay, so that's all I got. Is there any more questions, or are we good? Okay, so that concludes the webinar for today. for the approval processes. We kind of walked through all of the approval processes, how to configure them, the org structure, what the org structure does in terms of finding managers in the system and how that workflow works. And then I also walked you through the configuration of different approvals in the system, where you would go in scoping, and then where you would also go in the questions section in order to get those to show up in your system as usable items. And then also taking copies of your processes and then making them valid again. So I hope that was very helpful for everybody. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any other questions, obviously FMT here, consultants that will be able to answer any questions you guys have, whether you're a current client or a prospect, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you in any way we can. So thank you very much, guys, and we hope to hear from you again.